He's in Germany, speaking in German, and the game was invisibly translating it to English for me and invisibly translating me into German, and neither of us realized it. And we're going to get to the point where this is going to become a very normal way to communicate. So a world where we no longer have barriers of race and no longer have barriers of language, there's not that much left. And one of the things that many people have talked about is how the economy is changing. How it used to be economies were so much tied up within nations, but now we're able to the information economy is allowing us to send information everywhere. And remember when the idea of an international phone call and the incredible cost of it was something you'd worry about? And now you call up Sears to ask a question about your new washing machine, and you're talking to somebody in India on a free call for a half an hour trying to get your problem answered, and it's no problem. And many people have pointed out this interesting fact that the United States has never declared war on a country that has McDonald's. Now, that's sort of horrifying to think about, and there may be an easier path to world peace than we thought, but it points to the fact that when you have trade partners that you have an economic relationship with, you have much more incentive to have a peaceful relationship. And as barriers to trade are falling all over the place, maybe we are on a road where peace is kind of inevitable. So there's another one for the peace column there. We'll tick it up there. Maybe there's no more race and language barriers. Maybe those don't exist anymore because a tremendous number of the fighting and wars and conflicts, both on small scale and large scale, do seem to come from these sort of, groups against groups who kind of paint each other as outsiders. So I want to share a story with you about a more powerful way that video games have to be able to change things. Can you talk a little bit about, how you'd felt about hunting in the past?
Yeah, I have a sister who, lives in the country, and her son and her husband, she has hunted as well, but she had her son hunting, I think at the age of 6 or 7, and, he was taught to care for a gun and, respect a gun and use a gun, and I found that totally appalling. Just completely appalling that my sister would allow her son to be exposed to, violence and blood and death at such an early age. And I just, my sister allowing her son to do that, it just, was a major point of contention between us.
And then what happened?
And then, so we, started working on, I worked at a toy company that sells video games. We got the license of Big Buck Hunter. And, I started playing, as a part of my job, testing the game. And I turned into loving the game. And, something, I just spent hours. It was, more than testing. It was intense interest and fascination on, how I could want to participate in the sport. And I think that, that kind of changed my mindset on, how my sister had, chosen to expose her son to hunting. So I think that was a major point for me where I saw things a little bit differently. I have not gone hunting, but I have a new mindset and a new respect for what they do. I mean, I can see why someone would get, so into the sport. It's very, very addictive to me.
So I'm sorry, it's a little hard to hear, but I really did want to be able to share Haley's direct story there. I mean, so here's a situation where has this conflict with her sister, where she really doesn't approve that her sister's allowing her 6-year-old son to handle a gun and go out hunting. And this became a major point of contention where it was difficult for them to talk to each other because Haley felt so strongly about this. And something as simple as a video game designed, kind of for kids and young teens to kind of play, to play hunter in front of your TV changed her point of view about this. And so this is actually a weird and complicated situation. So on one level, like, this made Haley more accepting of violence, but on the other hand, it changed her point of view in such a way that it made peace between these two sisters. And these things are complicated. But the important point here, I think, is that even something as trivial as a child's game was enough to change an adult's point of view on an important moral issue. And there have been other games that have been designed to change point of view, and I think these are some of the ones that have the greatest power to have effect. So the Peacemaker game that started at Carnegie Mellon was Ossie Brock and Eric Keeler and Ross and Tim, and also Eric Brown was involved in that. A lot of people helped make this. The idea of it was very much to help teach peace to both Israelis and Palestinian high school students. Now, what these guys realized early was that the problem wasn't so much that it was important for these guys to understand these strategies. The problem was that they were trivializing the solution. They found that people who lived in Israel and Palestine very often had the opinion that, you know what, this is very simple. If those other guys would just stop being jerks, this problem would go away. And so here's a game that says, okay, now you get to be those other guys. Make the problem go away. And the game is complicated. And you see that the game features the realities of what is involved in the situation. And when you play the other side, you realize, oh, this is more complicated than I expected. And these guys flew out to the Middle East and did a lot of testing. And the thing they found again and again is people would come away saying, oh, the causes and the problems here are more complicated than I thought, and the solution isn't easy, and it isn't necessarily what I thought. Because this is what games are good at. They're good at showing us complicated situations in ways that other media aren't. They're very good at showing us, letting us experience how complex systems work. So that sounds pretty good, right? Video games have this huge power to let us see other people's point of view. And that seems very important. Well, so it looks like we have kind of a standoff here. We've got 4 and 4. So we need some kind of tiebreaker, something to push it over, somehow. So let's talk about violence a little more. Fantasy violence is one thing, but let's talk about real-world violence. It's something that I think many people have a distorted view about. I often find when I talk to students about, what do you think? What's the cause of real-world violence? They kind of come up with these situations that are weird. Well, somebody wants to get something from somebody else. They want to get some money or something or a car, so they commit a violent act and they take what they need. And that sometimes happens. That some amount of violence comes from just kind of a problem-solving methodology. This violence is going to help me get this thing I want. But I don't think that's where most violence comes from. What people, I think, often don't realize is that violence is a form of communication. Violence is a way for me to show you how much I'm hurting right now. You wouldn't act this way if you understood how I felt. And I'm going to make you understand how I feel right now. I think a huge amount of violence, both at sort of low-level domestic violence, all the way up to, nations invading nations, often comes from this root. And if that's true, if games can find ways to have people communicate better, that has huge implications. Because one of the changes we know that's happening is these technologies are letting us communicate in ways we couldn't before. Many people have come right out and said, yeah, that revolution in Egypt wouldn't have happened without Facebook. Couldn't have happened without Facebook. Facebook. Freaking trivial Facebook. Right? Facebook's not like a force for change. It's a force for sharing photos of your dog. Right? And something as simple as that is changing the world because it's letting people communicate in new ways. If we can all communicate and have practice communicating together, maybe things do change that way. I wanted to tell a quick story about a thing that happened when we were working on Toontown. In Toontown, it was a game for kids, 7 to 12. It was one of the first online massive multiplayer games for kids, and we had to solve all these weird problems. And one of them was typing and communicating, because kids can't type very well, and it's dangerous to let them to type to each other, and more dangerous to let adults type messages to children. So we made this system where you pick what you say from little menus. And the kids like it because they can say what they want real fast, and the context that they're in, there's only certain things they need to say, and it works out pretty well. And one of the things we intentionally put in was we made the phrases generally very polite and very positive and encouraging, because it's Disney and it's Toontown, right? So there's lots of thank yous and good jobs and you're awesome, and there's a lot of that stuff in there. We left in a few bad ones. The worst one is you stink. That's the worst one, because you got to have something in there. But generally, the game is set up to be a game about cooperation and working together and teaming up, even though there are aspects of it that are kind of in a kind of play battle context of throwing pies and that sort of thing. But it is about sort of teaming up. And we wanted to have messaging that helped you, support other people. When someone helped you, we wanted you to be able to say, hey, thanks for helping and good job and all that. Well, we started getting emails, and I remember one of them was really funny. It was from a grown-up guy who was playing this game, and he's like, I'm kind of mad at you guys. I played Dark Ages of Camelot a lot, and, we kind of trash talk in there, and that's a very common thing in these MMOs. You go out with a group of guys, you go out and you fight a bunch of monsters, and then you argue with each other about who deserves how much treasure from each of them, and you tell the other guy how much he sucks, and it's just kind of this trash talking culture. He's like, well, I kind of was playing less of that, and I was playing a little more Toontown. I initially played it as a break, but I kind of liked it. I played it more and more. And then one day I'm back in Dark Ages of Camelot, and we defeated this really tough monster. I'm like, hey, good job, everybody! And everybody's making fun of me. I'm like, wait a minute, why did I do that? And I realized that Toontown had changed my thought processes. Now, this wasn't something we intentionally set out to do. We did want to create kind of a positive feeling, but we were amazed at the effect that being able to set up these contexts and getting people to kind of model and practice good behaviors seemed to be having some kind of effect. And one thing I've believed a long time, because a lot of people say, oh, if you put goody-goody stuff in your games, it's going to really turn people off. They don't want that. But there is something that they do want. And I love this. Howard Thurston was a very popular magician at the beginning of the 20th century. And he said this, long experience has taught me that the crux of my fortunes is whether I can radiate goodwill toward my audience. There is only one way to do it, and that is to feel it. You can fool the eyes and minds of the audience, but you cannot fool their hearts. When you really care about what your game's going to do to somebody, and you really care about, man, when people experience this, I want it to kind of make them into better people. If you put that in there, people feel it and they acknowledge it. They don't always know where it's coming from, but they appreciate it because nothing feels better than the feeling that someone else cares what I become. And if you work on a game and you sincerely feel that way and you put it in your game, people are going to appreciate it. So one guy I think who knew this better than anybody else is our friend Mr. Rogers. Now I live in Pittsburgh, and Mr. Rogers, the entire career of Mr. Rogers was in Pittsburgh, and so he's somebody we think about and talk about a great deal, and he has a lot of wonderful thoughts. I love these two quotes from him. I got into television because I hated it so. And I thought there was some way of using this fabulous instrument to be of nurture to those who would watch and listen. And also this one. I believe that those of us who are producers and purveyors of television or video games or newspapers or any mass media, I believe that we are the servants of this nation. Fred took his responsibility very seriously. Not many people realize that he was actually a minister. And that at some point in his life, he decided that this was the way he could best serve the world, was to be able to create programming that would make children into better people, not through some overt religious message. He didn't think that was the right approach and that would work. but rather through simple messages dealing with the simple problems. And I'm going to show you a video now of that I'm sure some of you have seen, but I've seen it 20 times. I'll watch it 100 more, of an unusual situation that had happened in the late 60s when we were in the middle of the Vietnam War, and it was getting very expensive. And President Nixon had made a decision that we needed to spend more on it in order to win it. And one of the ways we were going to get the money is we were going to take it from public television. So they were going to cut the public television budget in half to spend it on the Vietnam War. And the Congress had hearings about whether this was the right thing to do or not, and they actually had Fred Rogers come and speak in defense of public television. And I'd like to show you the video because it is remarkable.
They prefer Fred Rogers to Superman, I Spy, Batman, Thunderbird, even Perry Mason and Merv Griffin. Mr. Rogers' estimated 99,600 homes with kids 2 to 11 represents a third of that audience. The show reaches an estimated 113,000 homes for an overall rating of 4 and a share of 10. Mr. Rogers is produced by Pittsburgh WQED TV. Now, Mr. Rogers is certainly one of the best things that's ever happened to public television, and his Peabody Award is testament to that fact. We in public television are proud of Fred Rogers, and I'm proud to present Mr. Rogers to you now.
All right, Rogers, you got the floor.
Senator Pastore, this is a philosophical statement and would take about 10 minutes to read, so I'll not do that. One of the first things that a child learns in a healthy family is trust, and I trust what you have said that you will read this. It's very important to me. I care deeply about children. My first children...
Will it make you happy if you read it?
I'd just like to talk about it, if it's all right.
Sir. Okay.
My first children's program was on WQED 15 years ago, and its budget was $30. Now, with the help of the Sears Roebuck Foundation and National Educational Television, as well as all of the affiliated stations, each station pays to show our program. It's a unique kind of funding in educational television. With this help, now our program has a budget of $6,000. It may sound like quite a difference, but $6,000 pays for less than 2 minutes of cartoons, 2 minutes of animated, what I sometimes say, bombardment. I'm very much concerned, as I know you are, about what's being delivered to our children in this country. And I've worked in the field of child development for 6 years now, trying to understand the inner needs of children. We deal with such things as the inner drama of childhood. We don't have to bop somebody over the head to make him, to make drama on the screen. We deal with such things as getting a haircut, or the feelings about brothers and sisters, and the kind of anger that arises in simple family situations. And we speak to it constructively.
How long a program is it?
It's a half hour every day. Most channels schedule it in the noontime as well as in the evening. WETA here has scheduled it in the late afternoon.
Could we get a copy of this so that we can see it? Maybe not today, but I'd like to see the program.
I'd like very much for you
I'd like to see the program itself, or any one of them, you see.
We made 100 programs for EEN, the Eastern Educational Network, and then when the money ran out, people in Boston and Pittsburgh and Chicago all came to the fore and said, we've got to have more of this neighborhood expression of care. And this is what I give. I give an expression of care every day to each child to help him realize that he is unique. I end the program by saying, you've made this day a special day by just your being you. There's no person in the whole world like you, and I like you just the way you are. And I feel that if we in public television can only make it clear that feelings are mentionable and manageable, we will have done a great service for mental health. I think that it's much more dramatic that two men could be working out their feelings of anger, much more dramatic than showing something of gunfire. I'm constantly concerned about what our children are seeing. And for 15 years, I have tried in this country and Canada to present what I feel is a meaningful expression of care.
Do you narrate it?
I'm the host, yes, and I do all the puppets, and I write all the music, and I write all the scripts.
Well, I'm supposed to be a pretty tough guy, and this is the first time I've had goosebumps for the last 2 days.
Well, I'm grateful not only for your goosebumps, but for your interest in our kind of communication. Could I tell you the words of one of the songs which I feel is very important?
Yes.
This has to do with that good feeling of control, which I feel that children need to know is there. And it starts out, what do you do with the mad that you feel? And that first line came straight from a child. I work with children, doing puppets in very personal communication with small groups. What do you do with the mad that you feel? When you feel so mad you could bite. When the whole wide world seems oh so wrong, and nothing you do seems very right. What do you do? Do you punch a bag? Do you pound some clay or some dough? Do you round up friends for a game of tag or see how fast you go? It's great to be able to stop when you've planned a thing that's wrong and be able to do something else instead and think this song. I can stop when I want to, can stop when I wish, can stop, stop, stop anytime. And what a good feeling to feel like this and know that the feeling is really mine. Know that there's something deep inside that helps us become what we can. For a girl can be someday a lady, and a boy can be someday a man.
I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful. Looks like you just earned the $20 million.
I think we'd all like to do a 7-minute pitch and earn $20 million. But you can see the power of that. And, you can certainly see how Fred felt about this so strongly. So, the 21st century, we have more ways to communicate with people and interact with people than we have in the whole of human history. And we're going to have more and more and more. We're going to have 100 times more, or 1,000,000 times more ways to do it. The 21st century is going to be a war for human attention. There are going to be people fighting a war for every moment of human attention. And this is important because where the attention of a culture goes defines that culture. Where the attention of humanity goes defines humanity. So who's going to be fighting this war? I think it's going to be these 4 groups. So let's talk about these 4 groups. First, there are the persuaders. These people are just concerned with making a buck. There's a lot of ways I can get your attention and make a buck, and, good for me, makes me profitable. These guys generally don't care about much beyond that. Are there negative effects? Who knows? Who cares? It's not our problem. We just want to make a buck. Then there's the fulfillers. Most game designers and the game developers I know fall into this category. This is where most entertainment is. These are people who want to fulfill the wishes and fantasies that people have. And it's a very rewarding thing to do, to be able to fulfill wishes and fantasies. Then there's the artists. people who want to make some kind of important statement or bring something to light that didn't exist before or to advance the medium. They don't necessarily care, what people think of it or whether it makes money. They care about doing something that seems and feels important. And then finally, the humanitarians, which I think is many of the people in this room today, who are primarily interested in how we can make things that are going to make us into better people, physically, mentally, spiritually. And you get this question of these four groups, who's going to win this war? Now, there's a thing we know, the golden rule. The one with the gold makes the rules. How can we be more persuasive than the persuaders? How can we possibly win against them? It's a hard question. And you have to be careful because it's not enough to just say, well, I know what quadrant I'm in. I know the group I'm in. That's enough for me. Because you might think, you're in one of those, but you may be in a situation that's going differently than you thought. You may have thought, well, I'm doing a thing that's going to fulfill wishes and fantasies, but really, you're working for somebody who's just out to make a quick buck, and ultimately, you're going to be beholden to that guy. How are we going to do that? Is it even possible to be more persuasive than these guys? I think it is, but it's going to be tricky, right? It's going to be tricky. It's not going to be easy. But if we work together and we focus, we can do it. We can channel the powers of these media, into ways that make the world a better place. So the last thing I want to talk about was this. I remember when I was 10 years old, it was late 70s. We were in the middle of the Cold War. And I remember getting into discussions on the playground with some kids. The day after it had been on television, we were all, nuclear war was something we always talked about, joked about. And I made this realization. Someone made some joke about, well, it doesn't matter. We're all going to get blown up anyway. And I realized that, I thought I was the only one who thought that. When I started talking to friends, I'm like, do you really believe this? And a lot of my friends were like, well, yeah. How can any of us? None of us are going to die of natural causes. We're going to die in a nuclear war. How is it possible? Look at all these bombs they're building and all these missiles. It's all anybody talks about. And it's true. Who builds tools and weapons they don't use, right? And I realized that I wasn't the only one who felt this way. Like, all my friends believed that we were going to be the last generation. We were going to be the last ones to be here. Why are we going to school? What's the point of this? What's the point of this at all? We're all it's going to get all blown up, and there's nothing we can do about it. And this was very troubling for me. I had kind of a depression about it. It was very frustrating. And then something changed my mind, and it was something on television. It was games on television. These unusual games where every nation in the world got together, they all brought their flags, and they all set their flags down. They all put their flags subservient to a more important flag. A flag that represents unity of all of humanity. And for this short period, this 2-week period, we forgot all of that stupid grown-up bullshit. All that stuff about, whose grandfather did what to who, and who's right and who's wrong, and who's better and who's worse, all of that stuff. We set that aside. And for 2 weeks, the whole world cared about nothing other than being children again. And cared about nothing with things like who can throw the ball the farthest, and who can run the fastest, and who can skate the prettiest. And I wondered then, as I wonder now, if we were better game designers, couldn't it be the Olympics all the time? Thanks.